All right, everyone, the American left right now is being truly scummy, which is that in the 11th hour of the midterms approaching, you know, it's getting on towards July here. There aren't that many months left to think about who you're going to vote for. The Democrats are trotting out immigration as an issue. Like, after obstructing for an entire year and literally doing nothing to solve these problems, they're trying to drum up attacks on Trump by saying, well, he's enforcing a policy that at first he wasn't really enforcing, which is that he's detaining children, minors that have come to the United States, separating them from their families. The adults get sent back and they're sort of sitting in camps. Now, there's a real fucking easy solution to this that the Democrats, of course, will never sign on to, which is why, by the way, I hope the Republicans do gain 3 or 4 Senate seats and maintain the House, so they can ram it up the ass of the Democratic Party. They can go after the sanctuary cities, stop the human smuggling that's going on, and the movement of drugs and all these other problems. There's such a simple solution to the concept of separating families. That's send the whole family back to their home country because they all immigrated here illegally. Yes, I believe in showing mercy and so forth towards somebody who's been here in the United States. Let's say they got brought over by their mom when they were 2. They speak the lingo. They don't really know anything about their home country. Okay, whatever, that's true. But if you are deporting the parents, the child having been a minor at the time, it really doesn't come into play. Look, if they're already like of age, let them make the decision. Why don't you say, well, you can have conditional residency, or you can go back, you know, with your family. The U.S. will pay for your ticket. You know, renounce whatever status you may have. It gets trickier. With some of these cases, you're talking about a person who was born on U.S. soil. They are a U.S. citizen under U.S. law. Now, I know some of the MAGA people, it's like they get into arguments with me about this. They're like, well, that's not settled law. Okay. It's generally defined. It's the practice of the United States and has been for a continuous length of time that if someone is born on U.S. soil, they are a U.S. citizen. As of right now, legally speaking, they are. In a binding way, they are a U.S. citizen. And no, you can't retroactively strip people of citizenship and expect not to have a civil war on your hands. So for right now, they're U.S. citizens. Someone was born on the soil. Their parents get deported. They're like 5, 10 years old, but they're a citizen. You can't deport them. They're a U.S. citizen. They're just going to have to sit in a camp or an orphanage or something for the next fucking decade. And I don't like the idea of that. Here's a solution. Pass a bill allowing those individuals to, because it costs money to strip a person of citizenship. If a person doesn't want to be a U.S. citizen, they want to renounce, they have to pay thousands of bucks. And it's also a fairly lengthy process, like paper to file and all that bullshit. It really shouldn't. It should be just, hey, I'm no longer a citizen, I'm joining a different state. We shouldn't have fees associated with moving out of the United States. I think it's an anathema to the concept of a constitutional free society. But here's the thing. Why don't you pass a bill allowing them, if they wish to go back with their parents, they will secure funds for travel. It's basically get on a bus, a plane, a ship, whatever the fuck you need. And they can renounce their citizenship. They don't have to pay a fee. Very quick, they just basically sign their name on a couple of forms. And then they get to go back with their parents. In some cases, the parents are being granted, you know, basically clemency anyway, and they're not getting deported. But the thing is, Trump has not made any of these rules. He is simply enforcing laws that were not being enforced for some time. We got used to the weird latter-day Bush/Obama presidencies whereby people who had broken the law and come to this country illegally were basically being ignored. Bush didn't have the balls to deal with the situation. He never envisioned securing funding for a wall, I guess. He was too busy killing people in the Middle East. There are some people who, I guess, think it would be better to start a bunch of proxy wars. They're like warmongering after North Korea. Oh, you know, just fucking nuke them and America #1. And this is coming from the liberals of all people. And at the same time, they act like this is the worst possible scenario. Your party did nothing to solve this problem in Obama's first couple of years when he had the votes to do so. He could have solved the problem. Instead, he used a lame-ass executive order that Trump can just throw out anyway to ignore the problem because he didn't have the balls to deal with it. It's not Trump's fault that these laws were passed. Some of these laws date to the Clinton era. Many of them date to the Reagan administration or to Bush. These are old immigration laws passed by incarnations of Congress that were variously both Democratic and Republican. Over time, this structure that we have for immigration was built. You never addressed, though, the larger problem. What if the executive branch just ignores its job and doesn't enforce the law? And there's nothing the legislature apparently can do because they don't have any balls either. They didn't want to stand out to Obama. They didn't want to get into a messy political issue. The Republicans did nothing too. The Boehner Congress, what did they do? For years and years, they just dragged their ass along like a dog that just took a sticky shit, and that's all they did. They obstructed and they made themselves look stupid, leading to the rise of anti-establishmentarian Republican members, the Rand Pauls, the Donald Trumps, and people like that, and they're kicking ass in the primaries now too. They're starting to kick out the establishment Republicans. Going forth for the midterms, I think that the Republicans gain a couple Senate seats. Some people are guessing 3 or 4. I'll go with a more cautious 2 based on the polling I see right now. I don't see any reason to say that the Republicans are actually going to lose the House. I mean, they're not going to have it by much, but you only need a simple majority in the House for all intents and purposes. It's the Senate you need more control in. The Republicans are set up for a total victory in the midterm elections. Hopefully that means that Trump can go around the obstruction and finally get the wall, reform the immigration system. Look, if you have to grant residency or citizenship to some proportion of people that are here illegally, that's fine, especially if they're like, they were brought here as minors or something. They don't even know their fucking home country. They don't know how to speak any language other than English. Okay, great, that's fine, but you can't just ignore the issue. The Democrats and the establishment Republicans, they seem to think that the only way forward is, hey, why don't we just do nothing? We'll make vague plans for some watered-down immigration reform that won't solve the long-term fundamental problem of mass migration, and we'll call it a day. In other words, you want to do what has been done continuously for decades in this country. Each time, it temporarily solves part of the problem, ignores most of the problem as well as the underlying cause of the problem, and then 10 years later it becomes a political issue again. You know why? Because the Republicans want their slave labor for corporations, and the Democrats want their captive voters that they can once in a while grant blanket amnesty to. That's what it boils down to. Very few politicians have any reason to want to seriously tackle the issue. Unless you're a politician in an area where illegal immigration is a particular problem, you know, along the southern border and in a few urban areas, you probably don't give a fuck about the issue. It's not really, your voters don't care. You don't want to talk about it because you might end up getting yourself kicked out of office or not elected if you're a non-incumbent. Trump doesn't give a fuck though. He's been haranguing about it continuously, and nobody seems to want to tackle the issue, despite the fact that Trump is the sane man in the room on it. Trump is the one you should be listening to. He's like, well, sanctuary cities, that's bullshit, and sanctuary states, and then there are cities within sanctuary states that are arguing against it and joining lawsuits on behalf of the federal government. It's all very strange. You've got millions and millions of people in the country that don't have an official status. Obama's idea, Bush's idea, the establishmentarians' idea is just ignore the fucking problem. Trump's like, hey, you know, there is a solution. We could prevent this from being a problem in the future if we had a border wall, if we enforced existing immigration law. Thankfully, Congress and the courts can't stop him from enforcing existing law. They weren't even, Trump didn't pass them. Trump didn't propose them. They were already there. Fucking Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and some of these people were president at the time that some of these laws were passed. It's just that they've been continuously ignored. No actual effort was made towards a long-term solution. Trump wants to do that. Give him his fucking wall. It will cost peanuts compared to what it'll save. As for these immigrant children, the Democrats and some Republicans are exploiting them. Oh, think of the children, think of the children. And so they show you pictures of like little kids crying in a detention center. Like, okay, we're going to base our entire immigration policy off of a cherry-picked number of children that are actually being screwed because Obama refused to adopt the policies that past incarnations of Congress and past presidents had already signed off on as perfectly acceptable and legal, and that the courts never had a problem with. That's not Trump's fault, dude. It has nothing to do with anyone. Practically nobody that's in Congress right now was in Congress in the Reagan administration. But, Congress people have a tendency to be reelected whether they're worth it or not, but eventually they retire. Eventually they die. Eventually they get caught, jerking off a prostitute, male prostitute, and then they get kicked out of Congress. Eventually, by hook or by crook, they get replaced by someone who's less old. Instead of 80, this one is 75. He's a relative spring chicken for the Democratic or Republican parties. That's basically what's going on. Showing you lurid pictures. It's just like, after every shooting, it's like, oh, think of the children. It's not a good way to determine your policies. That sort of tug on your heartstrings emotionality is the exact opposite of how the founders envisioned governing a society that was essentially aristocratic at its tastes. Fundamentally, the concept was that people who are wise, level-heads, should prevail in arguments so that you don't screw up your society. Unfortunately, all too often, we listen to emotion. Emotion gives you the Red Scare. Emotion gives you prohibition. Emotion gives you the drug war. Emotion gives you a rock. So fucking, tug on somebody else's heartstrings. Oh, you don't like the children. You hate children because you want to see immigrant families broken up. No, it's called we want to enforce existing immigration law that was signed off on by Democratic presidents and Republicans alike. Trump has nothing to do with it. His big proposal is let's build a fortification along our border to slow down this problem so it doesn't, at the very least, it's less of a problem in the future. And by the way, it won't cost that much money. It's a good idea. Give him his wall. And by the way, after the midterms, if the Republicans have won, if they retain the House and gain a couple Senate seats, 2 or 3, that's all they need, they will get the wall for Trump. At some point, fucking bitch McConnell is going to have to invoke the nuclear option if there's any further obstruction, once it becomes clear the American people at the very least want the Republicans to control the Senate. And on immigration, Democrats really shouldn't be bringing this up as an issue anyway. Some of these vulnerable people that are running for re-election in the House and the Senate that are Democrats, they can get targeted based on this. The American people, by and large, I don't think want to split up families, but that's the thing. It's just enforcing existing law. Why don't you negotiate with Trump and hammer out a deal? The Republicans kind of sort of tried, but it was basically the Democrats' deal plus basically peanuts, and Trump's like, no, I'm not going to sign this. Fuck you. That's about all. Peace out.